What are we going to read about now? Is this going to be depressing again? Well, unfortunately, some of it will continue to be about the bad effects of climate change on some of the cute animals and birds. So the chapter is called Pika and Cephalopod. Here we will read about the cutest animal you have never heard of, about the bird who thinks the world isn't big enough, and that's basically true, isn't it? We're too many people, and then we're encroaching on their space, their homes. Who wouldn't mind if the polar bear became extinct? You don't want that, but then is there somebody who wouldn't mind? And how trees can save lives, which you probably already heard of from your teacher and parents and friends and so on. And what extinction looks like. We keep saying maybe climate change is making some species go extinct. What does it mean? Why climate change can actually give you the creeps? Maybe after all the bad things you've heard, it's already giving you the creeps. But as I said, do not get anxious. Let's start thinking about what to do about the future, and the future is yours, and you are the future, right? And we'll see a little experiment on how to make a shelf vanish. Okay, so in short, we will talk about the consequences of climate change for nature. We talked about the consequences of climate change for us in the last chapter, mostly us, but we will see what happens to the other species as we are happily consuming fossil fuels and creating all this climate change. So here is Li Weidong, conservationist. You know, he's somebody who tries to save life. Peekaboo, I see you. Li Weidong was 28, very young, when he saw the animal for the first time high in the mountains of China. He had just sat down to rest from a long climb with a hiker like me. Suddenly, a shadow flashed past, and he looked at the spot where the creature had vanished and could hardly believe his eyes. From between the rocks, a creature from a fairy tale was peeping out at him. It looked a bit like a rabbit, but smaller and with shorter ears, and cuter, much cuter than a rabbit. He had never seen an animal like that before. Maybe no one had ever seen an animal like that before. And guess what? And the animal had not seen any people either. Obviously, Li Weidong decided to do some research into this new species. The animal belonged to the Pika family. That much was clear from his research. Pikas are nicknamed whistling hare. H-A-R-E, hare is also rabbit, because they whistle to warn one another of danger. One Pika sees Li Weidong coming along, and they whistle and tell the other Pikas, watch out, Li Weidong is coming. There are different sorts of Pikas in Asia and America, but none of them looked like the Pikas in the Ili region. Li called the species the Ili Pika. Is it Ili? Yes, Ili Pika. After that first time, he hardly ever saw any Pikas there again. He did find traces though, and calculate that there must be around 3,000 Ili Pikas living in that area where he had first seen one. He went on searching year after year after year. He's a good scientist and a conservationist. For 24 years he didn't see a single one. Just imagine how determined he is. For 24 years he kept looking, even though he didn't find one. He didn't give up after 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, 20 years. He went on for 24 years until 2014, when another cute little face popped up between the rocks, and Lee even managed to take a couple of photographs, because now he had been going back with a camera saying, I am going to photograph this Ili Pika. Just Google Ili Pika and the photos will be at the top of the page, and that's all from Li Weidong. Underneath you will see animals that look like him. Those are the other Pikas. 1 Pika, 2 Pika, distant cousins from the mountains of America and Asia. If you look down the Google page, you will see that even pictures of Pikachu, the famous Pokemon, right? Remember the Pokemon game and the movie and so on. Things are not going well for the Pikas, not in Asia, not in America. At this moment there are only 1,000 at most of the 3,000 Ili Pikas left. Pikas are worse at handling the health than your grandma is. A few hours spent in temperatures about 26 degrees can mean the pika is gone, dead, kaput. Global warming was forced on the pikas higher and higher into the mountains because as the warming increased, mountains kept getting warmer to higher and higher altitudes, which are like islands of coolness in a sea of heat. If you go up the mountain, you expect to find cooler temperatures, but global warming is not allowing us to enjoy that. But the heat is rising too, and the islands are getting smaller. Sea level is rising. Remember, valleys where it was once cold enough to cross or to go looking for food are now desperately dangerous and warm at about 26 degrees. So here are pikas up there saying nice and cool up here, but already it's getting warmer and CO2 is increasing, temperature is increasing, and the pikas are not happy. As a result, pikas are finding it more and more difficult to track down enough food and nice pika partners. Every animal wants to breed and find a mate, and it becomes harder. So you are looking here at a grasshoppery thing trying to climb, and there's Camilla Parmesan, the biologist, and Gary Yohe, economist, all working on worrying about these things and trying to preserve the species. Pikas are not the only animals though who are moving house because of climate change. There are climate refugees among all these species as well. The American Camilla Parmesan, I don't know. Parmesan is a cheese. I don't know how her name is pronounced. And Gary Yohe have examined thousands of books and notes written by nature lovers, people who year in year out noted when and where they saw certain animals or flowers. Until 1950 they didn't even find much shocking in those figures of what people were noting. Everything looked normal, but after that point, 1950, they saw a clear development. On average, plant and animal species are moving 600 meters towards the poles every year, and 60 centimeters up into the mountains. It may not seem like much, but 600 meters per year means in 10 years they have moved 6 kilometers. In 20 years, you can do the calculations what happens after 50 years. All these relocations could cause problems though, because they all play a role in nature, because not everyone moves at the same speed. Also, people who live in a new residential area sometimes complain that there aren't any stores there yet. So you move to a new place and you see there is not much food, there is not a mate to be found. It's the same for some animals. When they have just relocated, there isn't any food for them. In nature, everything is connected. At school, they call this the food chain, the food pyramid, the food web, and so on. If you take away one link in the chain, it causes problems into the chain for all the others linked up in that web or the chain or the pyramid. This also happens because of the changes in the seasons. We already talked about spring arriving earlier and summer getting hotter and fall lasting longer, winter arriving later, ending earlier, and so on. So plants are starting to bloom earlier. Lots of animals are having to adjust their schedules to this changing vegetation cycle. Insects are attracted by the flowers. Of course, the insects are food for the birds. Those birds are prey for birds of prey and for foxes, and ultimately they all depend on the plants at the bottom of the food chain, we say, because plants are converting sun's energy into food. That's solar energy going directly into food, like we use solar energy to cook or to warm the water. And how are these things going to turn out for the whistling hares? Li Weidong is afraid that they are going to become extinct. They have to keep moving higher to escape the heat. When they reach the top of the mountain, there will be nowhere left for them to go. It's too bad. They are not in touch with their family in the United States. A group of pikas there had found a different approach. They have gone down into cool valley instead of going up the mountain looking for cooler temperatures. Okay, they have to eat different plants when they go down the valley, but it looks like they are going to make it, so they are surviving. So biology and species respond differently depending on where they are. Some survive, some don't survive, and not everybody moves. And there are details in biology they call sedentary specialists, which means they don't move, they stay there, and they are very specialized in using what is there in growing in their neighborhood. And if they have to move, they just die. And then there are mobile generalists who can move around and find new places and survive in new places. They are entrepreneurial. If you don't know what that word means, don't worry about. Okay, so adapt, relocate, or die out. For many animals and plants, those are the three choices: adapt, relocate, or die out. Adapt means you change your food habits, and you change the time you wake up, the time you sleep, the time you find a mate, the time you breed, and so on and so forth, and you survive. Relocate means you just move away or you die. That's not a good option. Lots of species were already doing this, but because of climate change, it's happening all over now. In the air, at the poles, in the jungle, in the desert, on the streets, and in the ocean. This is not fun. We'll come back and talk about the bee eater, who's having its own problems, and you probably heard of all the disappearing bees, and you can imagine what's going to happen. A bee eater who's happily eating the bees. There is a balance. You cannot have too many bees, so bee eaters come along, and then if the bees disappear, bee eaters don't have food, and we don't have pollinators, because bees are very important for pollinating our crops, our trees, and our ecosystems, and so on and so forth. Come back and discuss a bit more about the bee eater. Okay?